David, a very warm welcome to our Bishop's vlog. So the lectionary reading for this week is, we're still going through Luke, and it's Luke 14, verse 1 and 7 to 14, where basically Jesus is talking about coming to a wedding feast and what seat to take, and then who to invite to a feast yourselves. So what do you think about this passage? What are the points that leap out at you that are worthy of consideration?
Well, I mean, it's a passage that we all know very well. It's a famous story. I was very struck at the beginning of the passage where it's stated that they're watching him closely. So clearly he's got a potentially hostile audience here who are looking to see if he's going to trip up. And clearly the context of the meal is a context which is very well known in the ancient world. There are lots of very strict rules in the ancient world about how meals are conducted and where people might sit, and this is no exception. And so he's using a context that's well known to people, but he's about to turn it on its head, I think. And there's a piece of literature in wisdom literature from the book of Sirach, where they're laying out very clearly in a Jewish context the rules governing whereabouts you sit in terms of top table or near the fire exit, as it were. And clearly this is playing into that understanding about how meals are meant to be organised by the great and the good. And here you have a case where Jesus is not only saying, well, these rules need to be challenged, he's also saying there are consequences if you don't actually think seriously about how you organise these meals and about where you see yourself in the pecking order. You know, if you walk into a room and you think, I'm definitely a top table sort of guy, and you walk towards the top table and your host says to you, I'm terribly sorry, but you're near the fire exit, that has got consequences that are both humiliating and self-revealing, I think.
So it's pretty practical teaching from Jesus.
Yes, I think it is.
In that sense. Yeah. So, did you read, I think Stephen Cottrell in the Church Times about the spiritual dangers of being a bishop?
I did, with great interest.
Yeah. So he talks about how we're driven around to places. We're shown the best seats very often. Seats that aren't just seats, but occasionally thrones.
Indeed.
That people carry our robes. People listen intently to us. So there's every possibility you begin to presume that I merit this. I deserve this kind of behaviour. And so we become bishops, the very kind of people that Jesus is talking about, who assume a higher place. Yeah. So this is pertinent potentially to somebody like me immediately. So how am I to avoid that kind of trap? And I was thinking about this, and I was 2 or 3 examples. So an African bishop, I remember saying, you know, when I go to some villages that haven't seen a priest for years, you know, I'm welcomed like I'm the Messiah.
Yes.
And when he was asked, you know, how do you prevent kind of like, you know, self-inflation from this? He said, well, I always remember Palm Sunday. And I think of myself as the donkey. Donkey wouldn't think when I'm being welcomed, oh, how wonderful, they've come out to meet me, the donkey. They've come out to actually engage with Jesus. And I may be carrying Jesus, but I'm not Jesus.
Yes.
Or I think of Richard Chartres, and one of the things that he used to say was, he said, sometimes I don't think I'm the Bishop of London. I think I work for the Bishop of London. The Bishop of London is a brand. And I thought that was quite interesting in a way of keeping a sort of healthy distance between oneself and the role that I kind of work for the Bishop of Dunwich.
Yes.
I'm not permanently the Bishop of Dunwich. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think the whole issue about deference has been a live issue for the Church of England in recent times, and there's been clearly some very unhealthy consequences about an over-deferential system. And so it speaks into that really well.
Yeah.
And I think with all these things, I mean, even as a lowly archdeacon, you can fall into the trap of thinking you're the most important person in the room, because very often people are very kindly gathering round you and supporting you and putting you in a place of exaltation because of the role you play. And that can feed into some of the less edifying parts of one's personality. So I think I think the story is a really interesting story in terms of challenging us about how we see ourselves, not just as Christians, but as human beings in relation to other human beings. What makes me important?
Yeah.
And how do I deal with the fact that that I may not be as important as I think I am? How would I react if I walked into that room towards the high table and was asked to go and sit beside the kitchen door? How would that make me feel?
And there's something about how we don't, how we give ourselves the message about our not believing the hype. I remember Dallas Willard saying, one of the things that's important is you don't pretend. Don't pretend you know somebody you don't. Don't pretend you've read something you've not. Don't pretend, because actually that's a way in which you keep in touch with who you are, and don't kind of like pander to this elevation which is about somebody you're not. The flip side of all this, though, is this is a dangerous gospel to preach to those who are at the bottom of the pile, because actually the last thing we want to be saying is that you don't matter, because we all matter. We're all children of God, and the danger of this passage for somebody with fragile self-esteem or somebody prone to beating themselves up is that it could reinforce it. So we need to be careful about, because Jesus is preaching this message to those who were trying to take a higher place, wasn't he? So
I think it's that. I think when you preach on this gospel, you have to be really clear about the context in which you're setting it, and also that Jesus is directing this towards those who might see themselves as being more important than others. But it's also a story, I think, for those who feel themselves to be less important. I think it isn't just for those who have an overdeveloped sense of self. It's also for those who feel themselves to be not worthy. So the story is also saying to them, look, the way that the room is organised for a meal and the assumptions made by some of your fellow diners do not reflect how God sees you. So you're not necessarily going to be the person beside the fire escape or the kitchen or the table furthest away, because if they're going to sit further down, then perhaps you're going to move further up. And so I think when you deliver this in terms of interpretation, it's really important that you open that up for people so they can hear. That.
So there's something about and it feels like Jesus is talking really here about the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is different from this, actually. And actually, in the kingdom of God, there's an upside downness that you cannot fathom. But whatever you do, here and now, is not about kind of like competition, comparison, or self-assertion in the name of personal elevation at the expense of others.
Yeah, absolutely.